So before I start this video, I want to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. I'm just kidding. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Saul Lopez and I am a freelance videographer and photographer in the fashion, music, and sports industry here in Los Angeles. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing 5 tips that I implement to help create more cinematic drone footage. Roll the intro. Alrighty, before I start this video, I did want to point out that I am flying on the DJI Mavic Pro version 1. So the majority of the footage that you'll see in this video comes straight from this drone right here. There's also clips of the previous drone that I owned before this, which was the DJI Phantom 3. Hopefully this proves to you and shows you that you don't need the newest and latest gear in order to achieve the vision that you want. However, it is always nice to have the newest and latest gear, I do admit. But yeah, everything comes from this drone right here. I also wanted to share the settings that I'm flying with. I've messed around for years now trying to tinker with different settings to see what versions work best for my workflow and the look that I'm trying to achieve. The majority of my work is for Instagram, now TikTok, YouTube as well. So the settings that I'm about to show you are what I've noticed work best for my workflow, but feel free to mess around with whatever look you're going for and the settings, because there's really no right or wrong answer when it comes to this. Getting right into the settings, first of all, I shoot in 4K and 24 frames per second. I've just noticed that for me, it creates a smoother, cleaner look. I also like the higher resolution because if I need to reformat or crop in, it doesn't lose as much of its sharpness as if I was shooting in 1080p or 2.7K. So if your drone allows you to shoot in 4K or higher, please do that, because it'll just help you in the editing room in the long run. Video format, I'm always shooting on MP4, NTC, and PAL. I always just shoot at NTSC. My white balance, I usually do auto white balance, but depending if the colors aren't being picked up correctly, then I'll adjust it for daylight. I mainly fly around sunset time, golden hour anyway, so I'm usually adjusting settings for that. For my style and color, I'm always shooting in Cine-like format. I noticed that this is the easiest to manipulate in the coloring room whenever you're trying to adjust the colors. So these are the settings that you'll see in all this footage. So if you like what you see, please feel free to follow these settings as well. And final disclaimer before we get into this video, please make sure that when you're flying a drone, you're abiding by all drone laws. I know it's gotten a lot more restrictive over the last year or two. I am licensed by the FAA to fly and operate a drone. So please make sure that whatever jurisdiction you're living in, you're following those guidelines and you have the proper accreditation. All right, let's get into this video. Getting into drone movement number 1 is what I like to call the reveal. So in the reveal, what you're basically doing is, as you're flying your drone, you are slowly remaining in the same altitude while also panning up your camera. So what is extremely important for all these movements is to not be going at full speed when it comes to flying your drone. You mainly want to be holding your joysticks at about 1/4 of speed or half speed. This way your movements are a little slower, making them seem a little bit more dramatic, exaggerated, thus creating the most cinematic feel. So if you see in this example that I'm showing you right here, I was flying my drone over a protest in Los Angeles, and the crowd itself marching isn't moving very fast, so it would be counterproductive for me to be just speeding down the highway above them. So my goal here was just to fly the drone as slowly and smoothly as possible, begin with my subject on the ground, and then slowly pan up in order to reveal the larger, wider setting to give it a bit of a better perspective for whoever watching it back at home can understand the magnitude of where this is taking place. So I do this a lot with scenery. I mainly shoot oceans, landscapes when it comes to drone. From time to time I will shoot people, but I think this reveal movement does a really great job of establishing your setting and really giving the bigger picture for the audience. Moving right along to movement number 2, it's tracking your subject in the opposite direction. So what I mean by this, whenever I shoot waves or oceans, the waves are usually crashing towards me, right? So I like to follow the waves, but going in the opposite direction. I do this for a number of reasons because I personally like to reverse the video when I'm editing it so that it looks like the waves are going in the backwards motion. And I just think that adds a cool dynamic that people don't usually see in social media videos with waves going in the opposite direction. So please try this out and let me know how it works for you. And movement number 3, I like to pull out while also increasing my altitude. So here you'll see a few examples. This first one is of a surfer in Malibu that I was shooting right at golden hour. I started right behind this surfer where I framed them right in the middle, and then I held it there for a few seconds just to get my movement and my joysticks ready. I slowly began to move my drone backwards in the opposite direction while the subject was still in their place. And as I was panning backwards, I started to increase my altitude. This way is also another technique to help reveal the larger setting, to give perspective and magnitude to where your subject might be. So with this surfer, you know, when we start close up to them, you just see them and then you see the ocean. But as you're zooming out and then increasing altitude, you really gain perspective as to how minuscule this surfer is in such a large body of ocean. And I really like this movement just because of that reason, because I like to show how small someone can be compared to the larger setting that we're actually in place. And here's another example of that movement. It's also just waves crashing in Malibu. I did it very slowly, again, half or quarter speed on my joystick as I'm pulling out. And I just started closer to the waves and I started to slowly zoom out while also increasing my altitude. And I actually, for this social media post, what I did is after I got to a certain point, that's where I cut the video. But in the editing room, I reversed the speed so that it would be like a perfect loop. And that just adds a cool dynamic feel for a 30-second Instagram post. Moving on to tip number 4, and apologies, I do shoot a lot of the ocean. I just find it most relaxing. So a lot of these videos are gonna be straight from the Pacific Ocean in Malibu, where I spend a lot of my time whenever I'm shooting drones. So for this 4th movement, it's kind of a 2-parter, but it's basically just moving forwards and then pulling backwards. So with this, the first thing that you wanna do is really establish your framing. So whatever you're trying to show, make sure you're establishing your framing, and that could be where you want your video to end or where you want your video to begin. So whatever you want that final frame to look like, make sure you frame that first, and then you can begin to either slowly zoom out or you can start to slowly zoom in. So in this example, I was shooting a sunset over by Point Doom in Malibu. The colors were just amazing, very golden hour, a lot of purples, a lot of gold, a lot of yellow, with the waves in the ocean as well. It was just a very beautiful scenery. I felt like I didn't have to do any crazy movements because it was already a beautiful setting as well. So what I decided to do was just simply move forward for 20, 30 seconds because I knew that in the editing room, like I mentioned before, I was gonna reverse it for a 60-second Instagram post. So I just moved forward for 30 seconds, as mentioned before, and this was the final product. And I felt like I didn't need to do anything. And that's something key to remember, that you should let your setting and your subject speak for you. You know, don't try to do too much and get too crazy with it. Sometimes, especially in this case, less is more. And for this final movement, it's simply panning down while moving forward. So in this example, you'll see I was actually in Bali and I went to Nusa Penida, which is a really cool dinosaur looking island that you've probably seen your favorite Instagram influencer visit. So when I was there, I decided to fly my drone. I highly discourage you, if you're ever there, to fly it because the winds were immensely strong and I almost lost my drone, and that would have been actually the worst thing that ever happened to me. But I still was able to get this shot and I think it really turned out great. So basically what I did here was I was slowly moving my drone forward while also panning down on the wheel. So remember, again, while on the joystick, you're going at a slow speed, but when you're panning down, you also really want to be dramatically slow with it. And that'll just add another feel and level of cinematic experience to your viewer, just because it'll create a smoother feel. So in this case, I noticed that there was a bunch of waves that were crashing at a certain point, and I wanted to finish the pan down as waves were crashing onto the shoreline, and then I wanted to continue moving forward in order to just add to the length of this video. So you'll see here that as the waves are crashing, I'm moving forward while also panning down, And as soon as I finished the extension of how far my camera can go on my drone, then I just kept moving forward in order to increase the length of the video. I also wanted to give you a sixth and final drone movement that you can implement. This one is a little bit more advanced, quote unquote, and it might take a little bit more practice for you to do. But for this one, it is a 360 rotation, maybe 270 degrees, depending how far you can go, while also panning down. From this example, you'll see a runway show that I was shooting during Miami Swim Week. So we were at the W Hotel, which is right on South Beach. And I had this vision of my mind of the end of the show when all the models are walking down the runway at the same time. And I figured that it'd be a really cool aesthetic feel if, as soon as the runway was full with models, to start rotating around the runway in order to get a fuller, bigger perspective and a different movement that you really don't see from runway shows. So as soon as I saw all these models walking down the runway, I started to just spin in a 270 degree rotation. I was doing all this manually. I believe there is a setting that you can program into your drone. Feel free to experiment with that. I didn't have time in this setting. So I was slowly moving the drone in a rotation, counterclockwise motion, and at the same time, slowly panning my wheel down. And this was the final result. All right, everyone, so I hope these drone movements were really helpful and something that you can implement the next time you're flying your drone safely and with all regulations in mind, of course. But these movements have proved to work for me in my workflow and for my clients. So feel free to use any of them. I'd love to see your examples. Please comment below if there are any movements that I might have left out that you use and are helpful in your day-to-day workflow routine. With that being said, I really appreciate everyone watching. If you learned something, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. Stay safe out there. I'll see you next time. Thanks so much.